Welcome, everyone. My name is Thomas Friedhoff. I'll be your stage host for today for this session of Living Better. Later on, you can find me also at the Green Deal stage with some interesting startups. But with us today is Rob, and he will tell you his story and some of the interesting things he has to share. And I think he can do that much better than I can. So without further ado, I will give the floor to Rob. So Rob, please take it away.
Hello. Thank you for having me. And I can be sort of I have a short story, basically. I think a few stories, and I hope at the end they will go somewhere. And the first story is about a Japanese group called Fukeshu. So if you Google Fukeshu, Fukeshu, you find a group of what was then called Ronin. They were samurai without a master. They were not allowed to have their swords. And what they did, this was a few hundred years ago. They were first thing they did is that they went to stay very close to a monastery, a temple, and they stayed there for about 10 years. So when they got out, everybody thought they were part of the temple. Second thing that they did was they redesigned the sword into a flute, and also the flute became a club. And the third thing they did was to invent a story for themselves. And so this group of Ronin, samurai without a master, called themselves the Fukeshu. They went to the shogun, at that time it was called Edo, and they asked him, can we beg in the streets? Can we play music, shakubashi music? You Google it and you can find it. And he said, yes, you can, but you have to basically then also spy for me. And if you find these Fukeshu, you will see that they wear a mask. They have a mask, a basket over their heads, a wooden basket, so you can't see their faces. So they went out and they played the flute, the shakubashi flute, wearing these wooden masks. Of course, nobody saw them, and they could overhear conversations. So they became spies for the shogun. This to me has always been an amazing story. It's a little bit of the story that Nietzsche writes about when he talks about masks. Eine Maske mehr. He doesn't say take off the masks. He says give me another mask. Put on another mask. But if you read this story backwards, it's basically mask after mask after mask. So you see these ex-samurai with their wooden baskets over their heads. You think it's a mask. So you take off that mask, and then you find a group of people. A group of people who basically invented themselves. They invented the story of being part of this group coming from China through a priest called Chozan, and they simply wrote their own letters. They wrote their own introduction to the Edo. And to me, it's been always a very important story in the sense that that there is no essence. Sort of, there's only narrative. There's only story. And of course, one of the first things they did was to get very close to this temple, so that people would think that they were part of it. This to me has always been it's always been on the back of my mind, because to me it's a very positive moment, but it's also very you need focus in order to do this. So it's not always possible, but if you can do it, you can basically reinvent anything that you want from scratch in this world. That's important. Now, the second story is a story that happened just after the French Revolution, or just in sort of during the whole process, with a revolutionary called Blankie. And Blankie was a sort of commander of an unseen army. He was a commander of revolutionaries, and but he didn't know how many that he had. So he had no clue about how many people he actually sort of commanded in sort of name, and he knew his lieutenants, but even his lieutenants didn't really know all the men. So at one point, he wants to see all the men. He wants to see all his revolutionaries. So they come up with quite a brilliant plan, which is that on a Sunday afternoon, they go to the Tairi, where everybody's walking and strolling about. And the old man is hidden behind a tree, and as the story goes, he has a gun with him, and he's just out and everything. And of course, everybody's looking for him, but he's behind this tree. And all his men are asked to go there, and with their wives and whatever, sort of with the families, and all these men are simply strolling about. So they're sort of just walking. But as they pass that tree, they start marching, and that would have been an amazing moment, because sort of people are walking, and then all of a sudden they go marching, sort of like in that, and after a few seconds, sort of the march stops and they become strollers again. So the only person sort of for whom they're marching is just Blankie in this moment. But the message is very powerful. It means that any group of strollers can become a group of marching people at any moment in time. But the other lesson there is that everything's temporary and momentarily. So it just means that if it's not focused at the right time, if it's not timely, then it simply doesn't exist. So if you look at the moment of the march, you see the march. If you look at the moment of the stroll, you see the stroll. But it's very, very difficult, and maybe even only in dance or performance, to actually get this moment where the two are sort of blurring. But that's the moment that Blanqui wanted, and that's the moment that I want to. That's the moment that we want to grab that moment. Now, where's the moment now? Sort of to be in a big picture. We're in between a few bubbles. So we have, let's say, state bubbles and commercial bubbles, and we know what's happening in there. We know the surveillance kind of models and the methodologies and that are operating in basically all of them. And as always, because as always things are actionable, there's always agency, there's a kind of moment. And that moment is kind of happening now, and it's centered around identity, and it's centered around a particular notion of identity, which means that in this kind of state bubble, we have been given numbers which are passports, and in the kind of sort of a commercial bubble, basically it's about the phone number. Sort of like with the number, you basically go everywhere, or the email, but sort of, let's say, the number, especially now in the days of all the apps. And so whatever happens at some point, our identities, even if they are come with certain safeguards or some kind of legal frameworks, the basis is that if our identities are tied to this core first issuer, which is the state with the passport, or the other first issuer, which is basically telcos and big GAFA systems with a telephone number, we as citizens, as individual actors, are fully sort of like in between Scylla and Charybdis in a matrix that basically is it has no more individual agency basically for us. All these systems are also in a way dying as we sort of feel. So this moment is happening, is rising. It's called self-sovereign identities. A lot of issues, lots of problems with it. But that's a moment that I think will, not just me, of course, will grow in the next decade, next years. And as a concept, it enables us to think about what are the requirements for self-sovereign identity basically to exist, and what are the trust mechanisms and the trustworthy sort of operators that enable us to then also validate and authenticate and be validated and authenticated by certain issuers that are not the state or the commercial bubbles. So this is the task. I would say this is the kind of the Blankie moment that there is today. That's also, I would say, the revolutionary moment where the agency is. So, in my opinion, doesn't really it's not really interesting to go to the streets or to do protests or do all these things. All these systems are dying. They're vampires that would just feed off your energy. So, best thing to do is stay at home for the next 5 to 10 years, do nothing, or at least do little things, small things, and work on these self-sovereign, autonomous, autarkic type of little things. I mean, that's that's what I'm doing. I think that's the best course, because now with these giant systems dying, you'll just be caught up in the fall of them, and the fall is a lot of debris, and you will get hit, as we see now all around us. So there's just simply no need to even contemplate giving these dying actors energy. Move away, move back, and move to a new terrain. Now, this new terrain all has to do with notions of autonomy, notions of self-organization in which we're not educated, notions of this self-sovereignty, which of course is not just tied to an individual in this kind of libertarian sense of the transhumanist kind of let's just do things and make a lot of money. Sort of, that's not the point. The point is that this has to be tied into communities, and it has to be locally acceptable and locally sort of harnessed in real relationships with people. So that's, I think, where the work is going to be for the coming years. It's going to be very invisible. It's going to be very small. It's going to be on both technical aspects, but mostly I would say on social cultural aspects, and also on finding new forms of decision making after these representative democracies are basically finally gone, after the 300 years of model of the Westphalian state that is now failing us everywhere, as we see. So technically, then there is this notion of disposable identities, and I really like that. And the kind of argument that led to it was the digital transition, basically, in which we're now all in. So this means that, and this is the key argument, is that you cannot no longer think in terms of, let's say, people and goods and machines and because it's all sets of properties. So people are a set of properties, machines are a set of properties, goods are a set of properties, events are a set of properties, and at some kind of layer, this AI layer, this analytics layer, all these properties are being meshed into new entities. That's what's happening now. So, for example, if you're hit by a connected car, then and the car then hits a rock, goes into the water, then everybody gets temporary identities. So the car gets a temporary identity, the person in the car gets a temporary identity, the person hit gets a temporary identity, the rock gets a temporary identity, the water gets a temporary identity. And this becomes part of an event identity. And on the level of this event identity, all the insurance and liability will happen. So in this next sort of mental imaginary of this digital transition, there are no longer people, goods, objects. They're just properties. And these properties can be mixed in all kinds of entities. Now, this means, and this is very important, if we as citizens do not gain full agency of our own identities and data, we'll be fully in all of these bubbles, and never ever be able to get out, because then it will be either state actors or commercial actors that define these event identities, and will be events simply, and as events we will be nuisances, as we see in all these systems. We will just be bugs in the system instead of features. That's not the point. Now, if you want to be a feature, that's the whole key is then look at this self-sovereign identity, investigate it, look at these notions of new forms of identities, will be identities, go to the plural. Look at these disposable identities, which is this basic idea that from a self-sovereign identity, you can then make smart contracts with people that just gave out certain characteristics. For example, if I'm living somewhere, renting a place, paying energy to a company, that energy company just needs to know that I can pay. Plus, maybe it needs, let's say, the address, the number of the address, so that if I don't pay, they can find me. But that's it. If I do pay, I don't even have to go there. all they have to know to get is some kind of credential that I can pay. Nobody needs to know who I am. Sort of that's not. So we need to break down all these relationships with service providers down to the level of the essential service that is being provided, and know nothing more. So to all of these relationships that are functional relationships in which we do not invest love, energy, anything of terms of agency, they need to be functional, and they don't have no there's no need for these relationships to actually know who we are. So we can be for cashew, we can put on our own masks, and if I take off my mask, you will only find another mask and another mask and another mask and another mask, and that's it. So thanks.
Well, thanks, Rob, for I think it was an interesting talk. I think we have, say, 2 more minutes, so a couple of quick questions. You talk about disposing of these identities and becoming owner of your own data. I think this is perhaps an interesting future, but there will also be incumbents. For example, I think the data industry is now a $1 trillion industry, which not many people realize. That gave us Cambridge Analytica, that gave us manipulation of elections. So while it's an appealing future, perhaps, there is vested interests which might not be very interested in this future. So how would you propose going about this to actually realize this? Because as I said, we all think about the fossil fuel industry, which is a $1 trillion industry, but not many people realize that your data is on average sold to 538 data brokers, and they probably resell it to a lot of other people. I, for example, know from people who lived in a certain neighborhood that they would get promotions from Porsche, and they had never purchased a Porsche or were interested in a Porsche, but based on their postal code, they would just assume, oh, well, some of your neighbors might have bought a Porsche, so please receive this promotion offer, and they were offended and they might have taken action, but most people take that for granted. So how would you prevent this? And I think this is the final question we can ask.
Yeah, well, let me just quickly then also expand on and making it a little bit even worse in what you were saying, because what is happening now online with our identities is this dynamic pricing. So if we both now sort of Google or try to find a flight to go to Paris, we pay a different price. And if whatever you buy online, if you check the back end of this kind of eBay transaction or some kind of other transaction, then you'll see that the price is fluctuating in real time. So if you actually hit the buy button at 3:05, it might be different than 3:06. Now this will go offline as well. So within 3 to 5 years, there'll be no more fixed pricing in supermarkets or hotels or place anywhere. Everything will become dynamic, and this is because now all these items have become entities. So basically, we can disambiguate from these processes, and also in a supermarket, you'll just simply put your phone to a QR code on a package of coffee. You will get your price. Somebody else will get their price. And the same will go for rent, the same will go for food, the same will go for taking a meal, the same will go for going to a hotel room. All of this, like now already offline, will go online. So that's the moment when when we see this kind of we see actually what is possible when we do not control our own identities nor control our own data coming from these identities. So what I see happening is not just, and I understand it's going to take some time, and it has its own issues, especially a custodian issue, because we're not really here we go. We're not really educated into handling our own private keys. So if we lose our private keys, then what will we need custodians for that. But the point is, there'll be two major trends happening. One is already happening, which is the negativity around the tools of this prior system. For example, nobody's really installing all the apps on the smartphone, even with COVID happening now. I think the uptake in Singapore is 15 to 20%, which is Singapore like uptake. So and the other thing is that people are becoming much more aware of these issues, and they will start demanding this kind of agency on data and identity. And exactly, again, I think especially when in just a few years' time, everything will become dynamic, and that is not something we're prepared for.
Okay, that's I'm not sure if that's a comforting thought. I think
Not a comforting thought. No. It's very sad. It's a very dangerous moment,
and I
which we
would
need
love to
to
talk more about
prevent.
this, but unfortunately, we're running out of time, and I need to also give attention to our next speakers at the Green Deal stage, where we'll be hosting Stefan Kloosterboer at 2:30 Dutch time, so 14:30 from Hero Balancer, which you might draw your interest because it's IoT driven and a clever way to make sure that gas, but energy used in building is not wasted, because 250 million cubic meters of gas is wasted when there are no or few people in the building at all. 150 million euro per year in potential energy savings, and these are just buildings over 800 square meters. And equally important, 450,000 tons of CO2 and carbon emissions that can be saved that way. At 3 p.m., we'll be having the VP Marketing of Lightyear, Tessie Hartjes. We're very happy to have her with us. At 3:30 p.m. Dutch time, we'll be hosting Greener Power Solutions, a clever sustainable energy provider for festivals, but also to construction sites. And they might have pivoted to a couple other things during COVID. So I would invite you all to join us for that. On that note, Rob, I would thank you for your time and for your interesting talk. And perhaps in closing, use 10 or 20 seconds to tell where people can find you on LinkedIn and, for example, your website.
I think disposableidentities.eu and the Internet of Things.eu. So I founded IoT Council in 2009, specifically to keep a close watch on all these things, especially for a societal perspective and for what it means for us, for people. So.
As said, thank you for your time. I've put up the website. I hope it's correct, or I'm not sure if there was a.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Again, thank you for your time. I would invite everyone to check out the other sessions. And if you want to hear more of Rob, please find him on his website or on LinkedIn or any other social media where you're probably omnipresent as an IoT developer. So again, thank you for your time. Thank you everyone for watching, or if you're watching this later on, feel free to also field questions to us, but I think also to Rob, because he might have some very interesting answers for you. And I would also encourage you to share these insights with policymakers, because I'm partially aware of this, but you said a couple of things which have further scared/awakened me. And I think you should do the same with, for example, your local politicians, your MPs, but also the EU policymakers, because if I'm correct, you're in Belgium. So you're close to the center of power on the European Union. So please educate them on these topics.
Yes, well, I'm actually part of a next generation internet project called NGR Forward, and this is exactly the kind of things that we try to bring to European policymakers. And so I'm part of the strategy group for this next generation internet. And basically all these things that we've been thinking about and working on in terms of identity, we've been doing in workshops with also a lot of Dutch and Belgian policymakers who, in behind the scenes, there's a lot of good things happening. There's a lot of good things moving. This is also why I'm pretty positive with these things, because a lot of civil servants are really understanding that the model has worn out. And it's just a very thin layer of politicians who are still talking in this 8 o'clock news layer, in which they basically only exist anymore. So but on the back end, people are trying to salvage a lot of the good value in the system. And so I'm very positive, because I know a lot of people are working very hard for that.
Again, keep pushing for that. And if people want to find you online, there's a bit of irony in that. And again, thank you all for watching. Please check out our other stages, and we'll hope to see you again next time.
Thanks. Thank you very much.